70 tons of jagged barren rock buried a family's legacy in a single afternoon. When a billion-dollar mining corporation exploited a century-old loophole to destroy a farmer's prized land, they expected him to walk away. Instead, he weaponized their trash, engineered an agricultural miracle, and cost them everything. Austin MacDonald stood at the edge of the lower 40, his calloused hands resting on the top wire of the perimeter fence. For 3 generations, the MacDonald family had bled sweat and prayed over this exact patch of earth in the heart of the Oakhaven Valley. It was a legendary parcel of land, renowned across the county for producing a yield of heritage winter wheat so rich and golden it looked like woven sunlight. The soil here was deep, loamy, and alive, a biological masterpiece crafted by decades of meticulous crop rotation, cover cropping, and back-breaking labor. But on a humid Tuesday morning in late April, that century of stewardship was slated for execution. A convoy of 10-wheeled dump trucks idled on the county highway, their massive diesel engines shaking the ground beneath Austin's boots. The sides of the trucks bore the crisp, aggressive logo of Granite Creek Extraction, a multinational mining conglomerate that had recently purchased the mineral rights to the adjoining foothills. Beside Austin stood Rogelio Sullivan, a regional vice president for Granite Creek. Rogelio was a man who looked distinctly out of place in the valley, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit and a pair of polished leather loafers that he carefully kept out of the mud. He held a leather-bound folder containing the legal death warrant for Austin's best field. "You don't have to watch this, MacDonald," Rogelio said, his voice dripping with a practiced corporate sympathy that made Austin's stomach turn. "The court order is clear. We have the right of way, and we have the right of disposal. It's simply business." Austin didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the lead truck. "That's topsoil." Austin's voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "My grandfather cleared this field with a team of draft horses. There's biological history in that dirt that you can't buy with all the venture capital in the world, and you're just going to bury it in tailings. We are utilizing our legally granted easement to deposit non-toxic earthen byproduct," Rogelio corrected, tapping the folder. It was a nightmare born of a forgotten piece of paper. Back in 1912, when Austin's great-grandfather purchased the farm, the deed had been severed. The surface rights belonged to the MacDonalds, but the subsurface mineral rights had been sold off to a railroad company, which eventually went bankrupt, passing the rights through a labyrinth of corporate shell companies until they landed in the lap of Granite Creek Extraction. When the conglomerate began blasting a massive open-pit quarry 2 miles up the ridge, they needed a place to dump thousands of tons of waste rock, mostly crushed basalt schist, and low-grade shale. A team of corporate lawyers had dug up the 1912 deed and found a devastating clause. The mineral rights holder possessed an easement of convenience over the lower 40, allowing them to use the surface for the storage of extracted earthen materials without compensation to the surface owner. Austin had fought them in court for 8 agonizing months. He had drained his savings, mortgaged his tractors, and hired the best agricultural lawyer he could find. But the letter of the law was absolute. The judge had ruled in favor of Granite Creek. Rogelio Sullivan raised a handheld radio to his mouth. "Commence dumping." The lead truck groaned as it shifted into gear, turning off the asphalt and rolling directly into the pristine green expanse of Austin's young wheat. The heavy tires tore deep, ugly ruts into the soft earth, crushing the tender stalks. Austin gripped the barbed wire so hard the metal bit into his palms, drawing thin beads of red, but he couldn't feel the pain. The hydraulic lift engaged. The bed of the truck angled upward. With a deafening, thunderous crash, 12 tons of grey, jagged rock slid out of the tailgate and slammed onto the fertile soil. A massive cloud of suffocating silica dust billowed into the air, coating the surrounding greenery in a pale, deathly film. Truck after truck followed, For 6 agonizing hours, the convoy ran a relentless relay from the quarry to the field. They dumped jagged boulders the size of engine blocks and mountains of sharp, pulverized gravel. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the valley, the lower 40 was gone. In its place stood a desolate lunar landscape of grey, barren stone. Rogelio Sullivan adjusted his tie, brushing a speck of rock dust from his lapel. "We'll be back next month to deposit the second phase. Have a good evening, MacDonald." Austin stood alone in the twilight, the silence of the evening feeling heavier than the rocks themselves. He walked out into the sea of stone. He dropped to his knees, his hands frantically digging through the sharp edges of the basalt, tearing his fingernails, desperately trying to feel the soft, damp earth that he knew was buried 6 feet below. He dug until his hands were raw and bleeding, but he couldn't reach it. The soil was suffocated. That night, sitting at his kitchen table under the pale glow of a single overhead bulb, Austin looked at his ledger. The lower 40 accounted for 60% of his annual revenue. Without it, he wouldn't be able to make the balloon payment on his equipment loans come November. The farm, his family's legacy, his entire identity, was going to be foreclosed on. Granite Creek Extraction hadn't just dumped rocks on his field. They had buried his life. For 2 weeks, Austin fell into a deep, paralyzing despair. He stopped going out to the barn. He ignored the ringing telephone. The town of Oakhaven murmured with pity, viewing Austin as just another casualty of modern corporate greed. The turnaround began, not with a grand epiphany, but with a stubborn weed and an observant eye. It had rained heavily for 3 consecutive days in early May. When the skies finally cleared, Austin forced himself to walk the perimeter of the destroyed field, assessing the fencing that the dump trucks had carelessly damaged. As he trudged along the edge of the grey wasteland, his boot caught on a jagged piece of dark basalt. He looked down, ready to kick the rock in a surge of lingering anger, when he stopped dead in his tracks. Pushing up through a dense, compacted layer of finely crushed grey gravel was a single wild thistle. That wasn't entirely unusual. Weeds were resilient. What made Austin drop to one knee was the colour and the size of the plant. It wasn't the pale, struggling green of a plant fighting for its life in barren terrain. The thistle was a deep, vibrant emerald, its leaves thick, waxy, and exploding with vitality. It was easily twice the size of the thistles growing in the undisturbed pasture just a few feet away. Austin pulled a pocket knife from his denim jeans and carefully dug around the base of the plant. He expected to find the taproot reaching deep through the rocks to access the buried topsoil below. But as he excavated the weed, he realized the root system hadn't reached the old soil at all. Instead, it had exploded laterally, forming a dense, fibrous web that was aggressively clinging to the tiny particles of rock dust. His farmer's intuition, honed over 40 years of watching things grow, began to hum. He took a sample of the rock dust, carefully scooped the thistle into a plastic bag, and drove straight to the State University Agricultural Extension office. There he met Cheyenne Jackson. Cheyenne was a brilliant, no-nonsense agronomist who had spent the last decade studying soil microbiomes. She was familiar with Austin's legal battle. It had been front-page news in the local paper, and she looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and caution when he dumped the plastic bag onto her stainless steel laboratory table. "Austin, I know what they did to your field," Cheyenne said softly, pushing her wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of her nose. "But if you are asking me for a chemical to dissolve 70 tons of rock, it doesn't exist." "I don't want to dissolve it," Austin said, his eyes burning with an intense manic energy that hadn't been there in weeks. "I want you to look at this root system. Look at what it's doing to the rock dust." Cheyenne took the plant to a macro-lens microscope. For a long time, the only sound in the lab was the hum of the fluorescent lights. When she finally looked up, her brow was furrowed in deep concentration. "This is fascinating. Cheyenne murmured. "The plant is exuding an unusually high amount of organic acids through its roots. It's literally dissolving the microscopic rock particles to extract minerals." She paused, turning to her computer to pull up geological data for the Granite Creek quarry. "Austin, what exactly did they dump on your field? Waste rock from the ridge, mostly basaltsome shale. Why?" Cheyenne's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Basalt is volcanic. It's incredibly rich in calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, and dozens of trace elements. In its solid boulder form, it's just a rock. But when it's crushed into dust, the surface area increases exponentially. You haven't been dumped on Austin. You've been given 70 tons of slow-release, highly paramagnetic, broad-spectrum mineral fertilizer. It's an agricultural technique called rock remineralization. It's rare because sourcing and crushing the rock is usually too expensive for a farmer to afford." Austin stared at her, his mind racing to process the information. "So if it's crushed fine enough, it acts like food. Not directly for the plant," Cheyenne corrected, her scientific enthusiasm flaring. "It's food for the soil microbes. The bacteria and fungi consume the rock dust, process the trace minerals, and make them bioavailable to the plant roots. If you were to mix this rock dust heavily with organic matter, say compost or manure, the biological reaction would be explosive. The soil fertility would go off the charts." A dangerous, beautiful idea began to form in Austin's mind. How fine does it need to be? "Like sand, or finer," Cheyenne said. Then, realizing what he was thinking, she shook her head vehemently. "Austin, no. They dumped boulders the size of refrigerators out there. You'd need industrial equipment to pulverize that much stone. The fuel costs alone. They have a Phase 2 dump scheduled for next month," Austin interrupted, pacing the floor of the lab. "If I don't turn a profit on the lower 40 this season, the bank takes the farm anyway. I have nothing left to lose." That afternoon, Austin didn't drive home. He drove to a heavy machinery auction, 2 counties over. He liquidated his emergency savings, maxed out 3 credit lines, and purchased a massive diesel-powered mobile jaw crusher, a terrifying piece of industrial machinery designed for highway demolition. When Austin hauled the massive crusher back to the farm, his neighbors thought he had completely lost his mind. Word spread quickly through Oak Haven that Austin MacDonald had snapped under the pressure. But Austin didn't care. At dawn the next morning, the deafening roar of the jaw crusher echoed across the valley. Austin climbed into the cab of his front-end loader. He scooped up a massive bucket of the very rocks Granite Creek had used to destroy his farm, hoisted them into the air, and dropped them into the steel maw of the crusher. The machine screamed and violently shuddered its steel jaws, violently gnashing the basalt boulders, grinding them down and spitting them out a conveyor belt as a fine, dark, mineral-rich powder. For 20 straight days, Austin worked like a man possessed by a demon. He slept 4 hours a night in the cab of his tractor. His clothes were permanently stained grey, his lungs burned, and his hands were blistered and raw. He crushed all 70 tons of the rock. Then he emptied his massive barn of 2 years' worth of aged cattle manure and organic compost, spreading it in a thick, rich layer over the newly crushed stone. Finally, he hooked up his heavy disc harrow and drove his tractor back and forth across the lower 40, churning the biological compost deep into the pulverized basalt. The friction of the rock dust blunted his steel discs, forcing him to stop and sharpen them every 3 hours, but he refused to quit. By the end of the month, the field didn't look like a rocky wasteland anymore. It looked like dark, granular volcanic soil. It smelled earthy sweet and violently alive. Austin had just finished loading the seed hoppers of his drill planter with his premium winter wheat when a shiny black SUV pulled down his driveway. Rogelio Sullivan stepped out, holding a new clipboard, a smug smile plastered across his face. "MacDonald," Rogelio called out over the idling tractor engine. "Just giving you a courtesy notice. The Phase 2 dump begins tomorrow. We have another 50 tons for you." Austin climbed down from the tractor. He didn't look defeated. He looked at the corporate executive with a terrifying, calm intensity. He reached down, scooped up a handful of the dark, mineralized soil, and let it sift through his fingers. "Tell your boss to send 100 tons, Austin said, his voice cutting through the valley air like a razor. "I'm just getting started." Seasons shifted, bringing a sweltering summer to the Oak Haven Valley. While the rest of the county baked under a relentless July sun, a biological miracle was quietly unfolding on the lower 40. True to his word, Rogelio Sullivan had dispatched the second wave of dump trucks, burying another quadrant of Austin MacDonald's land in 50 tons of crushed shale and basalt. Granite Creek Extraction viewed it as a corporate victory. Austin viewed it as a free delivery of premium agricultural fuel. The routine became a brutal, rhythmic dance. The trucks would dump their jagged loads. Rogelio would sign off on the paperwork with a patronizing smirk, and as soon as the dust settled, Austin would fire up the roaring diesel engine of the jaw crusher. He spent his nights pulverizing the corporate waste, mixing it with heavy organic compost, and disking it deep into the earth. By mid-July, the region was struck by a severe drought. The local news stations ran daily segments on the struggling agricultural sector. Neighboring farms saw their winter wheat stunt and turn a sickly pale yellow, the dry soil cracking open like a jigsaw puzzle. But Austin's field defied logic. His wheat had not just sprouted, it had exploded. The stalks were as thick as pencils, standing a full foot taller than any crop Austin had grown in his 40 years of farming. The color was a deep, mesmerizing blue-green, shimmering with health even in the punishing heat. Cheyenne Jackson, the university agronomist, visited the farm every Tuesday to take soil cores and tissue samples. One afternoon, she emerged from the towering stalks, her boots caked in rich, dark earth, looking utterly bewildered. "Austin, you need to see these numbers," Cheyenne said, spreading a stack of laboratory reports across the hood of his rusted pickup truck. "I've never seen anything like this outside of a controlled greenhouse." Austin wiped the sweat from his brow with a grease-stained rag. "Is it the water retention?" "It's everything," Cheyenne replied, tapping the first page. "The crushed basalt has created a massive paramagnetic charge in the soil. It's acting like a sponge for moisture, which is why your field is thriving while the rest of the county is burning up. But look at the Brix levels, the sugar and mineral density in the plant tissue." She pointed to a column of figures. "Your wheat is pulling up trace amounts of zinc, magnesium, and iron at staggering rates. The microbes are in overdrive. The root systems are going down 6 feet, anchoring into the subsoil. You haven't just recovered the field, Austin. You've engineered a supersoil." The secret didn't stay hidden for long. In a small farming community, a 100-acre patch of emerald green amidst a sea of brown is impossible to ignore. Word spread. Other farmers started parking their trucks on the shoulder of the county highway, staring in disbelief at the monstrous wheat swaying in the breeze. Inevitably, the rumors reached the sleek air-conditioned offices of Granite Creek Extraction. Rogelio Sullivan was driving out to inspect the quarry's expansion when he saw the convoy of pickup trucks idling near the lower 40. Annoyed by the traffic, he pulled his black SUV over and stepped out, expecting to see a tractor accident. Instead, he saw Austin's field. Rogelio's jaw tightened. This was the land they had mathematically proven was destroyed. This was the wasteland they had used as a corporate landfill. Yet before him stood the most magnificent agricultural yield he had ever seen. He didn't need to be a farmer to know that Austin MacDonald was going to make a fortune. The next morning, Rogelio arrived at the farm unannounced, accompanied by 2 men in sharp suits, corporate attorneys. Austin was in the machine shed, greasing the bearings on his combine harvester, in preparation for the upcoming harvest. "MacDonald!" Rogelio barked, stepping into the dim, oil-scented shed. "We need to talk about the arrangement." Austin didn't look up. He pumped the grease gun twice. "There is no arrangement, Sullivan. There's a court order, the one you shoved down my throat in April." "The situation has changed," Rogelio said, smoothly adjusting his cuffs. "Our geological team reviewed the material we've been depositing. It turns out the specific strata of basalt we are mining has significant secondary market value as an agricultural soil amendment. We will be ceasing deposits on your property immediately." Austin wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face the executives. "You're stopping the dumps. We are—" The lead attorney stepped forward, handing Austin a legal notice. "Granite Creek is reclassifying the waste rock as a commercial byproduct. We will be crushing it ourselves and selling it to commercial fertilizer brands. Furthermore, since you have unlawfully profited from our mineral assets, we are calculating a retroactive royalty fee for the stone already deposited on your land." It was a classic corporate maneuver: destroy a man's livelihood, and the moment he finds a way to survive, it penalize him for his resilience. Austin looked at the legal notice. He didn't yell. He didn't throw them off his property. A slow, chilling smile spread across his weathered face. "You boys really should have read your own environmental impact study," Austin said quietly. Rogelio frowned. "Excuse me." Austin walked over to his workbench and pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed binder. It was the same binder Granite Creek had used to defeat him in court months ago, when you applied for your Class 3 mining permit. Austin explained, his voice echoing in the quiet shed. "The EPA and the State Zoning Board required you to designate a permanent localized disposal site for your waste rock. You chose the lower 40. You swore under oath in federal documents that this rock was hazardous to transport long distances due to silica dust and therefore had to be dumped locally on my land." The lead attorney's face paled slightly. "If you stop dumping it here," Austin continued, stepping closer to Rogelio, "you are in direct violation of your mining permit. If you truck it out of the county to sell it as fertilizer, the EPA will shut down your billion-dollar quarry for illegal transport of unmitigated silica." Austin tapped the binder against Rogelio's chest. "You forced this easement on me. You made this my problem. Now, by your own legal design, you are legally bound to deliver every single ton of that rock to my field until your quarry runs dry. And if you miss a scheduled dump, I will be the first one to call the federal inspectors." Rogelio Sullivan stood frozen, the reality of the legal trap snapping shut around him. They were locked in. Granite Creek Extraction was legally obligated to provide Austin MacDonald with an endless supply of free mineral-rich fertilizer for the next 20 years. Late August arrived, bringing the culmination of Austin's grueling gamble. The morning of the harvest, the air was thick with anticipation. Cheyenne Jackson stood by the fence line with a clipboard flanked by a photographer from a national agricultural magazine. Half the town of Oakhaven had shown up, sitting on the beds of their trucks, waiting to see if the visual miracle would translate into actual bushels. Austin climbed into the cab of his massive green combine. He engaged the threshing cylinder, lowered the reel, and drove the machine into the towering wall of golden wheat. The sound was deafening, a glorious mechanical roar, as the stalks were pulled into the header. Inside the cab, Austin watched the yield monitor on his digital dashboard. The numbers flickered, climbed, and then skyrocketed. A standard exceptional yield for winter wheat in the Oakhaven Valley was roughly 60 bushels an acre. When Austin had a great year, he might hit 75. The digital monitor on his combine flashed in bright green digits, 183 bushels per acre. Austin's breath hitched in his throat. He had to stop the combine twice just to empty the grain tank into the waiting chaser bins, because it was filling up so incredibly fast. The grain pouring out of the auger wasn't standard wheat. The kernels were massive heavy, and a rich, glowing amber. By the time the sun set, the lower 40 was cleared. The results were staggering. Not only had the field literally tripled its historical yield, but the quality of the grain triggered a bidding war. When Cheyenne ran the protein analysis, it clocked in at a massive 15.8%, a number practically unheard of for winter wheat. Artisanal bakeries, high-end mills, and organic food conglomerates flooded Austin's phone. He sold the entire harvest at a 300% premium over standard commodity prices. With a single harvest, Austin generated enough revenue to pay off his equipment loans, clear the mortgage on the farm, and put a six-figure buffer into his savings account. He had beaten the bank, but the reckoning for Granite Creek extraction was just beginning. Following the publication of Cheyenne Jackson's academic paper detailing the McDonald remineralization method, the environmental spotlight swung violently toward the mining conglomerate. State regulators, prompted by Austin's flawless documentation of the rock deliveries, began auditing Granite Creek's other disposal sites across the country. They discovered that while Austin had safely neutralized the silica dust by binding it with organic compost and deep tilling it into the soil, Granite Creek was simply leaving massive open-air piles of the pulverized rock at their other quarries, violating dozens of clean air regulations. The subsequent EPA fines levied against the corporation totaled millions of dollars. The conglomerate's stock took a severe hit, and their board of directors demanded a restructuring of the regional management team. In late November, as a bitter frost settled over the valley, Austin was in his kitchen drinking black coffee when he saw the news on his small television. Rogelio Sullivan had been unceremoniously fired, cited as the scapegoat for the company's gross mismanagement of environmental assets. Austin took a slow sip of his coffee, feeling the deep, resonant warmth spread through his chest. He looked out his kitchen window. The lower 40 was resting now, a dark, rich expanse of engineered supersoil, waiting for the spring. Granite Creek extraction was still blasting the ridge, and every 2 weeks, like clockwork, their trucks rolled down the hill to deliver perfectly crushed, mineral-rich basalt directly to Austin's farm. Only now, following a renegotiated settlement to keep Austin from pursuing further civil damages, they were doing the crushing for him. They had tried to bury him under 70 tons of jagged reality. They had underestimated a farmer's innate ability to take the dirt he is given, mix it with a little bit of hell, and grow something unbreakable. Austin set his mug down on the table, pulled on his heavy canvas jacket, and walked out into the freezing morning air. The farm was safe. The legacy was intact, and the soil had never been richer. Austin's fight against corporate greed proves that sometimes the biggest obstacles are actually the exact tools you need to succeed. If you want to hear how this massive gamble played out in the final harvest, and how Rogelio Sullivan's company faced total humiliation, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the final chapters of this incredible true story.